The bond that shook the stars ***. The Omar Merrick decided that anyone who called Aurelian Station a miracle of diplomacy had never tried to walk through it in borrowed boots. The boots pinched at his toes. The floor adjusted its gravity every few steps, gently correcting his stride like a disappointed teacher. It smoothed his movement whether he wanted it or not, and somehow that made it worse. Theo had fought in vacuum corridors where one wrong push sent you spinning into nothing. He had survived atmospheric drops that left his knees screaming for days. Yet this silent, perfect hallway filled him with a special kind of fear, the kind that came with inspections, speeches, and expectations. He tugged at the collar of his formal uniform. It was stiff, uncomfortable, and clearly designed by someone who had never been shot at while wearing it. Medals rested against his chest, clinking softly with every step. They sounded far more impressive than he felt. Theo was a soldier, not a symbol. He followed orders. He fixed what broke. Sometimes, he saved things that were already on fire. That, apparently, counted as exceptional bravery. The summons had pulled him from his unit without explanation. No mission briefing. No warning. Just a time, a location, and a frightening number of official seals. The hall ahead opened like a cathedral built by engineers with unlimited money and no restraint. Light arched overhead in slow-moving ribbons, shifting into patterns that Theo assumed had deep cultural meaning. He secretly hoped they were not spelling his name wrong. Rows of figures filled the chamber. Some were humanoid. Some were almost humanoid. Some looked like physics had given up halfway through creating them. Their clothing shimmered, pulsed, or ignored reality entirely. Every eye, lens, and sensory organ turned toward him. Theo swallowed. "Okay," he muttered. "This is either a medal or an execution. 50-50. He marched forward because stopping felt worse. A voice filled the hall, layered and powerful, translated directly into his mind. It listed titles that seemed to last forever. Ancient names. Long honors. Finally, his own name arrived, small and plain at the end. Theo Merrick. Human soldier. Defender of the outer spiral. "Well," he whispered, "that sounds expensive." The speech continued. His actions were described in heroic language that barely matched his memory of confusion, shouting, and one very stubborn door. The audience murmured approval at all the correct moments. Theo stood still, hands clasped behind his back, pretending he belonged. He waited for the medal. Instead, the lights dimmed. That was not normal. Panels slid apart with a whisper smoother than his armor would ever be. A figure stepped forward. Not a hologram. Not a drone. A woman. She walked with calm confidence, every step measured. Her posture carried the weight of someone who had been watched her entire life. Her skin was deep and rich, a dark brown tone with a faint blue undertone that caught the light like polished stone. It was not glowing. It was not strange. It was simply hers. Her hair was dark, braided with careful precision down her back. Long ears tapered elegantly from the sides of her head, marking her as Ilari. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and very awake. This was not a gift. The voice spoke again, filled with reverence. Princess Lion of the Ilari. The titles that followed made the earlier praise sound casual. She stopped a few steps from Theo and met his eyes. For one terrifying second, Theo wondered if he should kneel, bow, or apologize in advance. He chose to stand very still. "This," the voice declared, "is the bond." Theo blinked. Then blinked again. "I feel like someone skipped several slides," he said quietly. A flicker of amusement crossed Lion's face. One ear twitched slightly. The hall waited. The stars beyond the transparent walls drifted on, uncaring. And Theo realized that whatever he had come to receive, it was not something he could hang on a wall and forget. The silence afterward was louder than artillery. Lion stood beside him, calm where he was stiff. The bond was explained, slowly, carefully. Not ownership. Not control. A living guarantee. Trust made flesh. Theo understood maybe half of it. The rest was drowned out by the thought repeating in his head. Alien princess. Alien princess. Alien princess. When the dignitaries finally dispersed, They did so with practiced ease. Some looked curious. Some looked concerned. One gelatinous being chimed congratulations. Theo nodded back because nodding felt safe. They were escorted through shifting corridors by hovering drones. Lion walked beside him, her pace matching his perfectly. "So," Theo said after a long silence, "should I panic quietly or loudly?" "Quiet panic is dignified," Lion replied. "Loud panic is honest." "That tracks." They entered a smaller chamber. The door sealed. Theo relaxed slightly. "I was expecting a medal," he said. "Maybe a photo." "I was expecting a scholar," Lion replied. "Or a diplomat. I have a scar from bad shaving." "Then we are both disappointed." A thin band of light connected them. Information flowed, not words, not images, but understanding. Theo felt her presence beside his thoughts. Not inside. Not controlling. Just there. When it ended, he exhaled. That was a lot. "You adapted quickly," she said. "I've had worse briefings." "Not yet," she replied. He laughed before he could stop himself. The days that followed changed everything. They shared quarters. The seam between their spaces slowly disappeared. The bond adjusted. So did they. Lion was watched constantly. Every word she spoke carried weight. She had been trained since childhood to carry the future of her people without letting it crush her. Theo saw it in the way she stood. In the way she listened. She was not fragile. She was precise. Opposition came quietly. Meetings filled with polite doubt. Questions wrapped in concern. Was a human soldier suitable? Was this bond stable? Was she safe? Lion answered calmly, dismantling centuries of argument without raising her voice. Then someone asked Theo if he believed himself qualified. "No," he said honestly. "But I don't quit." That mattered. Later, Theo was offered an exit. Honor. Promotion. Home. He listened carefully. Then refused. "I survived worse than responsibility," he said. "I can survive this." Lion felt the decision through the bond. She did not smile. But her shoulders eased. The final assembly was smaller. More honest. Lion spoke of change. Of strength through trust. Theo spoke simply. The galaxy listened. Later, in quarters that no longer felt divided, Theo looked at her. "Well," he said, "this is my life now." "It is," she replied. She smiled, fully, freely. "You were brave before," she said. "Now you are deliberate." Outside, ships followed new paths. Inside, the bond settled. Not a chain. A rhythm. "Together," she said. "For once," Theo replied, "that word feels complete." The Quiet War ****. The Omar Merrick learned something important in the days after the bond became public. War did not always announce itself with alarms. Sometimes it arrived with smiles. Aurelian Station continued to shine like nothing had changed. The corridors still shifted gravity gently. The lights still painted slow ribbons across the ceilings. Drones still moved with polite precision. But the way people looked at Theo and Princess Lion had changed. Not openly. Not rudely. Just enough to notice. Delegates paused when they passed them. Conversations lowered in volume. Eyes lingered for a fraction of a second too long. It reminded Theo of the silence before an ambush, the moment when everything looked normal, but your instincts told you to keep your weapon close. Lion noticed it too. She did not comment on it directly. She rarely did. But Theo saw it in the way her posture sharpened, in the way her long ears angled slightly backward when certain species approached. The bond hummed softly between them, not speaking, not warning, simply aware. They were no longer an idea. They were a problem. Their schedule filled quickly. Joint appearances. Cultural orientations. Security reviews disguised as friendly check-ins. Theo attended them all in his formal uniform. Boots still pinching, medals still clinking. He stood when told. Sat when invited. Spoke only when addressed. Lion carried the rest. She spoke calmly, clearly, her words precise. She answered questions before they were fully asked. She corrected misinformation without sounding defensive. Theo had seen commanders like that before. Leaders who did not need to raise their voices because everyone already listened. He admired it. One meeting ended with polite applause and carefully neutral expressions. As the delegates filed out, Theo leaned slightly toward her. You ever get the feeling we're standing in the middle of a storm no one wants to admit is coming? Yes, Lion said. That is why I'm standing very still. That's usually when my unit starts moving, Theo replied. She glanced at him. That is why humans survive. The first Raal warning came disguised as a routine systems test. They were in a control chamber overlooking the station's outer ring. Stars drifted past the viewport, distant and indifferent. A technician's voice crackled over the channel. We're seeing a minor delay in the bond synchronization. Theo frowned. Minor how? Within acceptable margins, the technician replied quickly. Too quickly. Lion stepped closer to the console. Symbols flowed faster, sharper. Her eyes narrowed. This delay is not natural, she said. It is being introduced. Theo felt it then, a faint pressure at the edge of the bond. Not pain. Resistance. Someone's poking the wiring, he muttered. The technician hesitated. There may be external oversight. Lion straightened. End the test. The channel went silent. Theo exhaled slowly. That's not comforting. No, she agreed. It is instructive. By the next cycle, rumors began to circulate. Some said the bond was unstable. Others said it was dangerous. A few whispered that it was manipulation. Theo heard fragments in corridors and public spaces. He pretended not to listen. That had been part of survival training too. Lion received formal objections delivered with perfect politeness. Each one questioned the same thing in different words. Was the bond truly voluntary? Was it safe? Was it wise to anchor something ancient to a human soldier? Theo finally asked the question he had been holding back. Did they ever want this bond to succeed? Lion did not answer immediately. She stood by the viewport, hands clasped behind her back. They wanted it to be controllable, she said at last. There is a difference. Theo nodded. Figures. The pressure increased. Security patrols doubled near their quarters. Official observers attended their briefings. Even their private calibration sessions were now supervised. Theo hated that part. He had lived most of his life under orders, but this felt different. This felt like being watched not for safety, but for mistakes. Lion handled it with quiet strength. But at night, when the station dimmed and the stars pressed close, Theo felt the tension through the bond. Not fear. Focus. Determination held too tightly. One night, he spoke into the quiet. You don't have to carry this alone, you know. Lion turned slightly. I have always carried things alone. Yeah, he said. So have I. It doesn't mean it's smart. She studied him for a long moment. The bond makes sharing possible, she said carefully. It does not make it easy. Theo smiled faintly. Nothing worth doing ever is. The breaking point came during the emergency session. No alarms. No flashing lights. Just a summons marked mandatory. They entered a chamber smaller than the ceremonial hall but heavier in atmosphere. Representatives from several major powers were already present. The tone was polite. Too polite. Concerns were raised. Safeguards discussed. Risks outlined. Then the proposal was presented. A temporary suspension of the bond. For evaluation, they said. Theo felt the bond react instantly, not panic, but sharp awareness. Lion spoke first. Suspension is not possible without damage. We believe the damage would be minimal, a delegate replied smoothly. Theo clenched his jaw. Lion's ears angled back. You believe incorrectly. The room shifted. A human representative finally turned to Theo. Sergeant Merrick, do you consent to a temporary separation? Every instinct in Theo screamed. This was the moment. Not a battlefield. Not an explosion. A quiet choice in a quiet room. He felt the bond steady, not urging him, not guiding him. Just present. No, he said simply. Murmurs rippled. I agreed to this bond knowing it would be uncomfortable, Theo continued. I didn't agree to walk away when it became inconvenient. The human delegate frowned. This is not about convenience. Funny, Theo replied. That's what everyone says right before they cut a line that's holding. Silence followed. Lion looked at him. Not surprised. Not relieved. Proud. The session ended without resolution. That was worse. Afterward, as they walked through a corridor that adjusted gravity to keep their steps aligned, Lion spoke quietly. You placed yourself in opposition to powerful interests. Theo shrugged. I've done worse for less. She stopped walking. He stopped too. You could have remained silent, she said. Yeah, he replied. And I would have hated myself. The bond warmed slightly, not emotion, not approval. Acknowledgement. That night, the station suffered its first true incident. A systems failure in the outer ring. Power fluctuations. Navigation errors. Nothing catastrophic. Yet, Theo was already moving when the alert came. Old habits kicked in. He grabbed his gear, scanning exits, checking angles. Lion joined him without hesitation. Security teams swarmed the area. Engineers shouted over each other. Theo spotted the pattern before anyone else did. This isn't random, he said. Someone's stress testing the station. Lion's eyes narrowed. To see how we respond. And to see if the bond breaks under pressure, Theo added. They worked together instinctively. Lion redirected command channels. Theo coordinated response teams. The system stabilized. Barely. Later, alone again, Theo leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Someone's escalating. Yes, Lion said. Quietly. Theo met her gaze. You ready for louder? Her expression was calm. Unyielding. I was born ready, she said. The next cycle brought confirmation. Intercepted data. Encrypted signals. A pattern emerging from the noise. Someone was preparing to force the issue. To break the bond publicly. To prove it was a mistake. Theo studied the projection, jaw tight. They think if they push hard enough, we'll fail. Lion stepped beside him. They misunderstand humans. Theo smirked. And Ilari. The bond hummed, stronger now, not strained. Aligned. Outside the viewport, ships shifted positions. New patrols formed. Old alliances adjusted course. The galaxy was moving. And for the first time, Theo felt it clearly. This was no longer about ceremony. This was about choice. Standing when walking away would be easier. Holding the line when the line was invisible. Theo cracked his knuckles. Well, he said, guess we're officially a threat now. Lion's lips curved slightly. Good, she replied. That means they are paying attention. And somewhere in the vast machinery of interstellar politics, plans were being made. Not to celebrate the bond, but to destroy it.